who's your first player that you're looking to buy?
Well, the first two who come to mind are probably the two most obvious big-time stars, first-round picks in a lot of fantasy leagues who are off to slow starts, and that's Damian Lillard and Jayson Tatum. And we'll start with Lillard in Portland. He ranks outside of the top 100 through 8 games so far. And granted, 8 games, a bit of a small sample, but when you're talking about an 82-game season now, that's 10% of your season. So it's a little concerning that he's shooting 35% from the field, 23% from 3. Already, Lillard has games where he's gone 0 of 9, 0 of 8, 2 of 14, 2 of 9, and 3 of 12 from 3. So really the three-point shooting has been the missing piece. He's getting a ton of assists. That's helped him kind of stay afloat, at least in fantasy leagues. I mean, if he wasn't getting 8, 9, 10 assists a lot of these nights, he'd be much further down the ranking. So in some ways, he's lucky to be 103rd overall. But the other thing that concerns me about Lillard is he's yet to take more than 5 free throw attempts in any game this season. That only happened 18 times all of last season. So he's off to a bit of a rough start as a shooter and as well as getting to the line. So he's been a little bit more reliant on that three-point shot that just hasn't been there so far. With all that said, I'm extremely confident that Damian Lillard will find it. No player that we're going to discuss in this video has a more proven track record than Damian Lillard. I mean, there's an argument that he's like the safest player in all of fantasy basketball, and that includes guys like James Harden and Steph Curry, because Lillard has never really had any injury issues throughout his career. He's been incredibly consistent. He's gotten incrementally better every year. Maybe he's one of these players who's being affected by the switch from Spalding to Wilson, the new ball. Who knows? But eventually Damian Lillard is going to get back on track. And if you can get him, like you said, for 80, 85 cents on the dollar right now from another manager in your league who's a little bit frustrated, who wants to win now, absolutely go ahead and do that.
So give me 1 or 2 players that fantasy managers could trade for. Like who are a couple guys that you could just anecdotally just throw out in a trade? Maybe you have 2 of these guys or in a 2-for-1.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking 1-for-1, you could kind of go down to like that tier 2 type of guard, someone like DeJounte Murray or SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like both of those guys are off to really good starts.
Okay, who you talked about? Jayson Tatum. You said that he was a good buy. He's off to a slow start. Tell us where he is right now on the player radar, and then what you expect from him moving forward.
So Tatum's only 5 spots ahead of Damian Lillard. He just sneaks into the top 100. He's at 98th entering Friday's slate. His start to me is a little more concerning than Lillard's, partially because it took 7 games for Boston to hold a players only meeting that was described as not even all that productive. So you might have some kind of internal factors that are clouding the situation with Tatum. He's just really struggling to score of late. 44 combined points over his last 3 games. He just shot 3 of 13 from 3 against Miami on Thursday night. But the good indicators for Tatum are that he has a career high usage rate of 31.3%. That's over 1 full percentage point higher than last season. He's also averaging a career high 8.1 rebounds per game. He's still handing out assists, and he's on the verge of being a 1.0 steals and 1.0 blocks player. So eventually, much like Lillard, eventually that shooting is going to come back for Jayson Tatum. And again, like Lillard, you probably prefer that he try to make more of an effort to get to the rim instead of relying so heavily on these pull-up threes. But either way, they're going to start falling. He doesn't have quite the same track record as Lillard. Obviously hasn't been in the league as long, but Tatum's been just ridiculously consistent through the first 4 years of his career. And like Lillard, has gotten incrementally better each year. To me, this is just a rocky start. And if I'm able to obtain Jayson Tatum, especially for a lesser return or for a player who I just don't really trust to sustain their value over the course of 82 games, I'm pulling the trigger on that right away.
Sounds like you have a little more confidence in Lillard based on the track record, but I like that going after Jayson Tatum as well. Okay, who's your third buy? Who's someone that's underperforming that you want to go get on your roster?
You have Chris Middleton, who's at 68th right now in 9-cat per game value, and Brandon Ingram, who's down at 80th. Similar fantasy players to me in some ways. I think Ingram has a slightly higher upside as an offensive player, but Middleton has just been rock solid. One of the safest players who you'll find in that third to fifth round range in most drafts. Both have been injured, or in Middleton's case, has been dealing with COVID-19 early on. So you might have a frustrated manager who doesn't want to wait for the unknowns, surrounding each of these situations and might be looking for a quick fix. I think both these guys are going to be fine in the long term. Brandon Ingram's going to be the number 1 guy in New Orleans until Zion returns. And he was super productive alongside Zion last season. He's been off to a slow start, especially as a free throw shooter, strangely. And that's kind of hurt his value a little bit. But I think the more games Brandon Ingram plays, he'll be just fine. And Middleton, a little concerning, all the injuries that the Bucks have had early on. It's been tough to evaluate them, but again, nobody's more rock solid than Chris Middleton. So if you can find a fantasy manager who doesn't want to wait another week for Chris Middleton to come back, or thinks that, maybe the Bucks added enough depth this offseason that they won't need Middleton quite as much, he's somebody I would love to have, because he's, as long as he doesn't get hurt, which hasn't happened the last 4 or 5 years, he's just a virtual lock to finish somewhere between like 25 and 45, which is super valuable. Michael Porter Jr. currently ranks outside of the top 175 in 9 category value on a per game basis. He was on the short list of potential breakouts based on what we saw from him in that like 25 odd game sample without Jamal Murray last season.
Wow.
And what concerns me most about MPJ relative to these other slow starts is he does not have the track record to fall back on that I mentioned with Damian Lillard and with Tatum and with Middleton. He's basically been a really good fantasy player for like 50 games. And I think we just assumed that he would pick up where he left off last season. And that has not been the case at all. He scored 15 or fewer points in every game so far. He's 10 for 46 from 3 on the year. He's one of his last 18 from beyond the arc. The nice thing is he's still rebounding well. He's actually adding some steals. He's never been a great defensive player as far as fantasy is concerned. But a big concern for me, 9 free throw attempts in 258 minutes so far. He's taken fewer free throws this season than the following players: Josh Okogie, Torrey Craig, and Alex Len. The Alex Len. Those guys have all taken more free throws than Michael Porter Jr. He's ranked behind Dwayne Dedmon right now on a per game basis. So his value to me has basically bottomed out. If you're somebody who took him like 28th overall in a draft, you're probably panicking right now. You're probably looking to offload him. I would not trade someone that I took in the first 3 or 4 rounds for Michael Porter. I think it's too risky right now.
Yeah.
Who
are some of the players that you would consider that might be in the middle or the back of your roster that you think could get it done?
Well, that's a good question. Somebody who I took maybe in like the 50 to 80 range. Like that's where it starts for me, where I'd consider potentially giving a player like that up for Michael Porter. I don't know. The first name that came to mind is like a Terry Rozier type, okay. A Darius Garland, somebody like that. Rozier missed a little time with the ankle early on. Garland's been good, not great so far. I think if you can give up someone who maybe you feel good about, because you still have to give up something of value to get a player like Michael Porter Jr. It's not like we're 50 games into the year and he still hasn't scored more than 15 points. Like it's a small enough sample that as a manager, you can still justify, demanding a pretty handsome return for Michael Porter. So you're gonna have to give something up, but I would give a player up that I know does not have higher than top 50 upside. You're basically saying like, I'll take the chance on Michael Porter that he turns it around, and in exchange, I'll give you somebody who's solid, but not somebody who's going to be a league winner for me and somebody I'm going to really regret giving up.
Yeah, I like that. These are the type of moves you have to make in order to win fantasy. It's hard to win a season-long fantasy league, so you have to take some gambles. And if these things bottom out on you, so be it, right? To see all of our fantasy basketball content, click the link in the video description below. If it's behind our premium wall, you could try RotoWire right now for 10 days free. Just go to rotowire.com/try.